How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Agave and Cactus Talk. Today we're actually not going to be talking about agave or cactus, but we're going to be talking about another plant that is also within the agave family, which is actually like a mislabeling because it's actually the asparagus family. So agave is part of Asparagaceae, and this family of plants includes agave. It includes Dacilerion, which people commonly know as sotol plant. It includes Hespero yucca, Furcraea. Trying to think of some other ones. Manfreda, Mongave, technically, even though it's not a genus, it's just intergenus hybrids. So yeah, it has a lot of different plants, right? Some of them out in this family of Asparagaceae have started to interest me a lot, just because they are so similar to agave that I basically treat them as such. And as I mentioned several times before, a lot of these plants were in the same group of families, so they weren't split up until a few decades ago. And there's been a whole bunch of reclassifications and stuff, and it's botanists are always debating stuff like that, right? But when I talk to people about this group of plants, I tell them, a lot of these plants were probably seen by the indigenous as all agave, right? They probably didn't make a distinction between Hespero yucca and Furcraea and Manfreda as being separate from the agaves that they commonly used as well. And I mention this because a lot of these were used in the same ways as agaves, right? So if you listen to the Hespero yucca podcast, Hespero yucca Whiffly, you know that 5,000-7,000 years of cultivation of that Hespero, I was about to say agave, of that Hespero yucca in LA County, and maybe even longer around California. But they roasted it, and there's roast pits, and there's a lot of research on that as well. And the same thing actually goes to the Dacilerions, right? To the Manfredas and to the Furcraeas. So while agave, most people only think is from Mexico, it actually expands all over the Americas. There's agave that is native to California on the western coast of the United States, and then it goes into Arizona and Texas, and even all the way down into Florida, right? You got agave decipiens, that is Florida agave. So it expands the whole United States from west to east. You got agave Americana naturalized in a whole bunch of places, and then it goes all the way down into South America, right? I think there are, if I'm not mistaken, agaves in Chile and Argentina. But there's several in Venezuela, I know, and Colombia, and there's naturalized all over, but native I'm talking about. So agave expands this whole Americas, and it's really interesting because, like I mentioned, Hespero yucca and Dacilerions and all these other plants were kind of seen as agave by the indigenous, utilized in the same ways, and they're making drinks, fiber, forage, food out of them, all in the same way. And today's plant that I want to talk about is Furcraea Foetida Mediopicta in specific, which is a subspecies of Furcraea Foetida. So it has a variegation. The original is just a green, and the Mediopicta, it's more of like a blue, white, green combination. So Furcraea Foetida and Mediopicta subspecies are native to Brazil, and I actually think they might be native to parts of Mexico, southern Mexico. I may be mistaken, and it may just be that they were naturalized there, but you know, not too sure on that one, but for sure they're native to Brazil, right? And the indigenous people of Brazil utilize these Furcraea exactly how Mexicans, Americans utilize agave. And in this case, when I say Americans, I mean the whole Americas, right? So they were utilizing them, the Furcraeas in Brazil, for food. They were roasting the stalks, the pinas. They were giving their animals the Furcraea for forage. So a lot of places they have Furcraea just growing wild in Brazil everywhere, in some regions, and a lot of cattle farmers give it to their cattle because it's spineless, at least on marginal spines, right? It still has one small terminal spine. So once again, spineless a lot of the times doesn't mean 100% spineless, right? Like in cactus, for instance, spineless a lot of the times can mean it's spineless, but it's not glaucodless, right? So the small spines. In agave, a lot of the times spineless means that it lacks the marginal spines, which are on the leaf sides, whereas the terminal spine, which is at the end of the leaf, most agaves carry a terminal spine, even though it might not be as sharp as some other species, right? So Furcraea is one of those spineless with a terminal spine. Some Furcraea, when they're young, can have spines. I've seen in a lot of my bulbs that these Furcraea have spines, and I'm seeing that they probably hybridized either with another Furcraea close by or an agave. And I mention that because the Furcraeas that I got these bulbs from are third gen there in the garden, and that garden has a lot of different agave species that are flowering at the same time as this Furcraea. And I haven't yet heard of a hybrid between an agave and Furcraea, but the fact that I'm finding spines and different colorations on the Furcraea Foetida Mediopicta that I've harvested in places that are full of other agaves, it makes me wonder if that is a hybrid, because they're not supposed to have marginal spines, right? So anyways, this agave utilized pretty much exactly how us Mexicans and Americans utilized it, or this Furcraea. And it's really interesting because Furcraea appeals to me in a lot of reasons, because so I really like agave desmentiana because it's spineless, and then people can have it in their gardens and brush up against it, and it's not messing with them too much. And if you got kids, or and the same thing, I've been recommending it to different avocado farmers and different fruit tree farmers, planting it at the base. And by planting agave desmentiana at the base, you have a spineless supplemental crop that won't interfere with harvesting your fruit, nut, or different type of tree crops, right? So you can get a supplemental crop with spineless agaves, 2 to 4, even up to 5 feet out from your trees, so they're not interfering with harvesting. And you're not going to need any supplemental water, irrigation lines, anything like that, right? Just plant them at the base of those trees, and they're pretty much going to be living off the water that's already existing. So when I was let's talk about the first time I discovered some Furcraea, right? So one time I was in a garden and I was taking care of some Furcraea, and I realized, or some agave, and I realized that this one agave was bulbing, right? And I was like, oh cool, I'm going to save all the bulbs. And then I take the bulbs back, and my friend told me, hey, that's not an agave, that's a Furcraea. And I was like, what the fuck is that? You know, I don't know what the fuck a Furcraea is. And that's kind of why I'm making this podcast, actually. Most people do not know what a Furcraea is, right? So, interesting, because anyways, I thought it was an agave. I fucking harvested the piña, harvested the bulbs, and the leaves look consistency like an agave desmentiana, just they were oversized, you know. I mean, in the Furcraea Foetida Mediopictas, I've harvested piñas that have been in between, the lowest was 60 pounds, the highest was 120 pounds, and they've all had over 30 bricks. So I was very surprised, you know, that this wasn't an agave, right? Like, I had distilled a lot of agaves, you could say, at this time that I didn't know what species they were, but I always took photos and made sure to really like look to try to find the species, right? So over time I would be identifying all of these, and then after a while, you know, I had you know, distilled some of this Furcraea without even realizing that it was not an agave, you know. So that identification happened post distillation, right? Which was an interesting thing for me, because I was like, you know, fuck, that was a waste of time because it's not even agave, right? But then my homie's like, no, this shit's like fucking Brazil's agave. And I'm like, you know, what do you mean? And he was Brazilian, and he was telling me, yo, how you guys use agave, we use Furcraea in Brazil. We feed it to our cattle and sheep and goats, and make fiber out of it, and have a huge, you know, ability to convert it into biomass because they're so big. So he was telling me that some people were researching them potentially for biofuels, and I was just like, wow, that's crazy. It just sounds exactly like agave. I'm gonna start growing it, right? So when I realized it was distillable, when I realized it was being used as food, fiber, forage, I realized this shit's basically an agave, and I started to try to cultivate it, right? Well, Furcraea, let me tell you a little bit about it, right? So I told you it's from Brazil, but this Furcraea can get up to 10, even 12 feet wide, I've seen. It can get up to even 6 to 8 feet tall, and as I mentioned, produce over 100-pound piña, which puts it in the size range of many agave tequiliana cultivars, right? And as we know, agave tequilianas and agave angustifolia, subspecies tequiliana, right? Most people are using cultivar Blue Weber, and that cultivar of tequiliana roughly is producing a lot of, it's been really tough recently. I feel like their shit is getting even smaller now in Jalisco. But you can expect 50 to 150 pound piña, you know, 120 pound piña. And so Furcraea Foetida is basically, you know, a spineless tequiliana, almost like producing a pretty big piña. It gets pretty wide, pretty big, and it grows pretty quickly, you know. A lot of them in gardens, in my garden or other gardens that I take care of, I've seen them grow up within just the time that I planted them. So many of them are 6 to 9 years old. So this Furcraea could get pretty large. It's actually surprised me how large they can get. But yeah, it's got a lot of use, as I mentioned. You know, for instance, a lot of spined agaves, the cattle don't really like them. You have to cut out the spines, and then spineless options like Furcraea Foetida Mediopicta or agave desmentiana variegata that have no marginal spines. The cattle just fucking consume them like crazy. They could eat them up no problem. So that's where spineless has a lot of benefit, I think, for the animals, you know. Like, I've been cutting back a lot of this Furcraea, and what do you call it? I'm getting right now a lot of leaves that I can basically give to my goats and my rabbits. So that's really dope that they're eating this stuff because it lowers their water and obviously gets them full. So it has a lot of, look at my past podcast on animals and cactus or agave. Yeah, I mean, the Furcraea can serve a huge benefit to a rancher like me because, it's a drought-tolerant option that grows really quickly, and you can basically use it for forage, and then you can make, at the end of its life, some different products out of it, right? And just like agave, it probably has 1,000 uses. I mean, I've seen people already in Brazil that when I've mentioned this plant to them, they got me on the different, things that they make from it, I guess, in Brazil, right? So I was telling them, I had distilled it, and a lot of people were telling me, like, it's common in some areas to make wine from it. I was like, that's fucking dope. Like, I'm gonna try making some wine out of some Furcraea. And then another person from Brazil mentioned to me that the stalks also were roasted and consumed, and then people also fermented them and made wine out of them. And I still haven't tried that, but that's another thing that I'm really trying to get going maybe this year. I got some Furcraea stalks, but I don't know if I'll have time to actually utilize them before they dry out and stuff. I may just use them as steaks, as I have in the past. And anyways, yeah. So Furcraea, fucking amazing plant. I mean, it likes a little bit of shade, like if you plant it in a field, it's almost better to have it companion planted with another plant that gives it a little bit of shade, like a legume tree, like a palo verde or mesquite or acacia, right? Because if it's getting full sun, it'll do well in the whole year, but in the summer it might get a little toasty for it. So that's one thing I'm actively working on, because I want to grow Furcraea. Because the cool thing here too is like all this agave legislation and bullshit and drama that's starting up, it's like Furcraea is a completely other genus, but can be used completely the same way as agave. And now I have 10,000 of these plants cultivated, and I can do the same thing I want to do with agave with Furcraea, and not have to worry about going through all this paperwork, all these commissions, all this bullshit politics in agave, right? I could just move my agave to Arizona, for instance, and do it over there without any regulations. So it's an interesting crop because you could farm it side by side with agave, but you don't need to abide by a lot of the California's regulation on agaves that may be incoming, right? And then it's like going to give you that adaptability of, okay, now I don't like this legislation, I don't want to abide by it, let's just farm Furcraea, right? And you can still keep doing the same thing. The stills you build, the processing, the roasting, all of those things that you build will still be able to run Furcraea, right? And if you switch over from agave. So it's one of my backup plans of many of them. We always discuss them on the podcast, and I always talk to you about them because it's like, I try to talk to y'all like you're my clients for consulting, and it's like you have to have options to adapt and to make sure that you don't go out of business and stuff like that. So, having Hesperoyuca, Furcraea, Dacilerion, Manfreda, Mangaves, all these different options to distill, to make wine, to use for fiber, forage, silage, biogas, all of these different options. No matter what happens in the politicians' bullshit, you always got different options. You get me? So Furcraea is just one of these different options that I love. And it fits right into our system of dry farming, drought-tolerant crops like agave, cactus, right? So, fucking ghost got me walking a lot today. So where can we plant Furcraea, right? So Furcraea is going to be basically like an agave desmatiana. It's going to take 20 to 25 Fahrenheit lows, and it can take really hot. It can take up to 118, 119 Fahrenheit, provided it has water. If it's being dry farmed, it's definitely going to suffer at that at that summer stage. So what I try to do for the Desmatianas is make sure that I water them at least weekly during the summer. Most of that is rainwater or dirty goat poop water, because we are a dry farm, so we just pretty much just use what we catch for the fuel crops, right? So yeah, Furcraea, man, I love this fucking crop. It's really just been one on my mind recently, and I really wanted to talk to y'all about it. But yeah, so I've been shipping out Furcraea to Texas, to Florida, to different states that fit within this 20 to 25 cold hardiness level. And you know, they're growing well for them. A lot of people are telling me that they're, you know, growing really quick, and from pictures it looks to be the speed of growth almost of an agave angustifolia subspecies marginata, which is very quick. It looks like this Furcraea is growing very, very quickly, and that's great. Well, it's good and bad, right? Like, I'm gonna have to up pot all these bitches in probably like 2 months, which sucks. But the bigger they get, the more money I make, and the faster I can put them into the field. So to be honest, I'm not tripping. The Furcraeas, what I think I'm just going to do is let them grow kind of like I do with my Desmatianas the whole year, and just cover them in the hottest month of the summer, which usually is this month, August, and then cover them the coldest month of the winter, which usually is either January or February. If I got to double up, like do 2 months instead of one, pretty cool with that. You know, with just putting a pole every 6 feet, it's pretty easy to tarp up all of your plants and, you know, have them growing in those extreme climates. So, you know, before I just thought it was a lot of work. I was like, fuck that, I don't want to do that. But there are certain species that I've distilled a lot, like Desmatiana and, you know, the what's the other one that fucking, the marginata from the angustifolia. There's certain ones that I'm just gonna like, not give a fuck about planting a lot of, because I love their flavors. And Desmatiana, if I got a shade tarpet to make sure that I could get thousands of plants that I can make into something I like, not a bad trade, to be honest, you know. I've been on citrus farms and different farms where they do that type of tarping, and very familiar with it, so I'm not really worried about it. I could do that, for instance, for agave tequiviana, and I did for the first cycle of me growing, but to be honest with you, its flavors aren't something that is super, super appealing to me, and that's, yeah, I guess after a lifetime of drinking tequila, it just has bored me. So I don't want to spend my time exploring something that there's 4,000 brands exploring. I'd rather explore Desmatiana, I'd rather explore Marginata, which is in Mexico called Rubenscens. And yeah, these different agaves, Furcraeas, Asparagaceae that people really aren't exploring, and I get to enjoy these really unique flavors and, you know, inspire people to take up those crops as well and stuff, right? After they drink some of this stuff. Like, one of my boys, I had made some Asparagaceae Whippley wine, and I let him drink it back in like November, and he just now is like all about this crop. He's like, fuck agave, like, I'm just gonna be farming Asparagaceae Whippley. And I'm like, dude, that's amazing, you know, like, more power to you, man. But he had initially, you know, came to me asking for help planting agave, right? And after the Asparagaceae Whippley wine, he just decided that was going to be something that he was going to explore, the Asparagaceae Whippley wine and spirits over the agave, because he's also been one that's tried a lot of my different agaves, and I guess the Asparagaceae Whippley just hit for him, so more power to him. He's on that, right? But Furcraea has a lot of potential to go, maybe, I would say right now, probably to like 15 states, you know, so it's got some potential. Agave, Desmatiana, and Furcraea, we're just going to be covering them a bit, but yeah, Furcraea Foetida Mediopicta, it is also a bulbous plant, right? So it can produce I would say anywhere from 500 to around 4,000 to 5,000 bulbs. I've seen some with 500 and I've seen some with 5,000. So it looks like there is some variability there, and that explains also the variability on the piña sizes, right? So, I've explained in other podcasts that you can get the piña and the bulbs or the seed, but you can't get 100% of the piña or the bulbs and the seed at the same time. So I'm harvesting a lot of bulbs, like say, in a 3-4 inch range, but then they could go all the way up to an 8-inch range on the stalk if it eats the whole thing, right? And then, but I'm doing that so that I could still harvest the piñas, right? Because if I let it eat the whole piña, then I get nothing. So, a lot of these Furcraea piñas may have been larger, when before they bulb, right? I'm just not too sure, because, like, for instance, I try to aim for around 40 to 50% of the piña. I'll measure it, and then I'm like, okay, if it's a 4-foot core, I'm gonna let it shrink down to like 2 feet, right? And then by doing that, I'm gonna be able to get half of the bulbs or the seed, right? Well, most of those halves I've even measured at 60-70 pounds. So I say a conservative 120 on that max scale, but it may be that some of those Furcraea piñas are hitting 140, 150 pounds because of that observation, which is exciting because, as I mentioned, a lot of people like the taste of the Furcraea and of wine and spirits, and it's just something new and exciting. But yeah, like this recent one I harvested, I got like 2,000, and it was a really nice piña, and probably gonna go harvest that in the next few weeks. But I just have been working on the pups and the and the actual stock, right? Because it's a lot to deal with at once. And the piña is the hardest thing to harvest. So, well, I don't know. Maybe harvesting all the pups could be just as hard. I'm hoping that by me starting to promote and farm Furcraea the past 2-3 years, that people can now actually start to want to do this crop in California and elsewhere, right? So I think I've sold to around a dozen farmers and a couple thousand plants, and they're exploring Furcraea just as much as me, I feel like, because I'm just like a novice at the crop. But it's like people are now reaching out to me about Furcraea farming, and I'm just like, I'm doing it, but that doesn't mean like I'm a super expert in it. And even the Brazilian people that know Furcraea, like Furcraea farming is like out of this like world type of concept to them, you know what I mean? Because they're like, why the fuck would you farm that crop? But yeah, it's an interesting thing with Furcraea. Now that it's in different farmers' hands, we've indirectly started the Furcraea farming in California and the USA, which is great, because even if I fail, the plants are in enough people's hands now that somebody will fucking succeed at it and make sure that Furcraea has its time in the spotlight. My job, I tell people, I don't really, while I do sell a lot of plants, I've never really done it for the money on the spirit side. So I kind of just like to explore stuff, and then I kind of give it off to other people sometimes, because I have like 1,000 fucking spirit ideas I want to explore. So it's like sometimes I'll be talking to a really skilled individual farmer or whatever, and then I'm just like, I got this idea, it looks like it lines up with what you want to do, why don't you explore the fuck out of it, And there's every farmer that I sold Furcraea to has 50, 100 times the resources that I do, and they're gonna really give it a shot, right? So that's what excites me. But they're also excited, as I mentioned, like with this whole California AB 2606 agave commission bill. They're excited that they don't have to deal with that shit. And I'm like, man, I should just switch to Furcraea too. This is bullshit. But I just love agave so much, so that's why I struggle with the bullshit. But Furcraea, you know, it's a funny thing because a lot of 1 and 2 gal Furcraea that I see at nurseries are selling like for like $15-20. So because it's a more rare plant, it's selling way higher than a lot of the agaves are at those stages, you know. And even the bulbs, I'm selling them for, you know, anywhere from $2 to $4 a bulb, depending on size quantities. And those bulbs, I might be, you know, like agave desmatiana, I'm selling anywhere from $1 to $2, depending on size quantities, right? So it's like, it's almost double the price of a lot of agaves, even straight out the start. And that only expands as it grows. Like some giant Furcraeas, I've seen them sell in 15 and 20 gals for, you know, a couple $100, 300. I think I've seen some in LA, 200, maybe the lowest. And then you'd be rare to get that price for many agaves at that stage that are more, you know, available to people. So Furcraea on the farming side presents a lot of opportunity. On the nursery side presents a lot of opportunity. On the product side presents a lot of opportunities. And that's why I just really wanted to talk to you guys about this crop, because I'm just like, man, I think people will really be excited to farm this thing. And, you know, right here, I tell you, I'm going to have to tarp it in the winter and the summer. Every person I sold it to in California, none of them have to tarp it. Like, they live in great climates and it doesn't get fucking cold or anything. And that's also why Furcraea is going to have a great place in California agriculture, because a lot of the places in California do not get winters under 25 or even 20 Fahrenheit, right? So they have the ability to farm these crops on shade tarping, like the Desmatianas or the fucking Furcraeas or the, you know, let me think of another one that I have to tarp, right? Like Tequiliana. Some of those people, like if you're out in Santa Barbara or LA County, like in the west side, dude, you're like in Goldilocks zone county, you know? You don't have to fucking do anything, man. I mean, it's wild, you know? Like some of my friends in Santa Barbara, they have the whole family that they can fucking farm of agave, right? Like all 200 species. Whereas, you know, if you're in the desert, you're limited. Automatically take away probably half those species. Because not many of them are cold hardy, you know. So, yeah, Furcraea, it's going to do well in California, I believe. Just like Asparagaceae and just like Decilerion, and you know, I got some people farming Manfreda now. It's like from seed too, which is an interesting thing. Never even fucking seen Manfreda seed, to be honest with you. Some of my Manfreda or Mangaves have seeded, but I've never had like an actual Manfreda. You know, I need to buy some. Actually, I do have some. I have some Helen Waynes and a couple different cultivars of Manfredas, but they're still small, so they're far away from flowering. But yeah, you know, if you want to get in contact with me to try to buy Furcraea, you know, always just hit me up on the IG, FarmingandGardeningCalifornia, or on TikTok, agave times cactus, you know, agave x cactus, I guess. And then also, you know, this will be on YouTube and, you know, obviously wherever you listen to your podcast. But, yeah, I just wanted to quickly talk about, it's like over 30 minutes, quickly talk about Furcraea, because I just want to put it on your radar. And even if, I always tell people, even if you don't buy plants from me, I don't really give a fuck. At least you know about the crop, right? And it may be a crop that you want to utilize. And, you know, for me, I think Furcraea, because it reproduces so much by pup and bulb, and it grows so large, I'm going to potentially start exploring, you know, I'm making a biodigester in the next few months, so that, you know, I wanted to make a new septic field, but then I was talking to my homies in Africa about, I think I was mentioning this in another podcast I still haven't uploaded, but about biodigesters and how they utilize, these biodigesters to basically take up their poop and their waste. And not only that, they're able to throw animal manures in there, and they're able to throw really dense sugar stuff like agave or cactus, and they're able to make gas from it, right? So I've had like different biodigesters that people built, but I've never built one myself. So now I'm going to build one myself out of concrete and make that piping, that gas is that's coming through that piping available for me to cook on a consistent basis and stuff now. And also I'm going to try to heat a bunch of my greenhouses using that biogas. So I'm just going to incorporate Furcraea into that, right? So I'm going to be using agave and cactus, but now I'm also going to be using Furcraea, because I think it's a perfect candidate for making bioenergy. And in my case, I'll be making biomethane so that I can cook with and heat stuff with. And I've even explained to other people before that I would love to make an energy company where you're basically bottling up in tanks this agave, cactus, Furcraea biogas, and you can basically sell it as you would a propane tank, right? If you do that, we're talking $1 billion company plus, right? So whoever does that, like, salute to you, man. That's going to be something that I want to explore here in California for sure. Going to try to cover my own gas consumption first, and hopefully by doing that, I'm figuring out what I would need to start a small-scale energy company that utilizes agave, cactus, Furcraea biogas, right? So it might be for manufacturing or something, who knows? But there's a lot of innovation here happening in Lancaster, California, surrounding hydrogen and stuff. So maybe we try to work with different universities and create biohydrogen or something, but who knows? What I know how to make is biomethane with the biodigester, so that's what we'll work on for now. Furcraea has a huge potential with that because of its biomass and grows very quickly. It's interesting because Furcraea, just like agave, is invasive in a lot of places. Like, I was reading the other day that Furcraea is invasive in like Hawaii, like it's all over the place. And I'm just like, then I was reading this other article the other day about bulbs and just how, like, these invasive species like agave americana, agave Furcraea and C. solana, they reproduce by pup, bulb, and seed. So they're like a triple invasive threat, whereas, for instance, agave americana only does the two. They do by the pup and the seed, right? So these triple threats can be quite the crop that's lucrative for farming, and that's why I really like bulbous agave and Furcraea, right? Well, actually, I think all the Furcraeas I've dealt with are bulbous. I'm not even sure if there are Furcraeas that aren't bulbous. That's an interesting one, right? Because I've only dealt with 3 different types of Furcraeas, and they all give bulbs. It's like, what? Damn. Yeah. Because I've seen a bulbing Furcraea McDougalley, Furcraea Foetida, Furcraea Foetida Mediopicta. So I guess actually I've seen a 4 Furcraea, have never seen a flowering. And then there's that variegated McDougalley, which I'm sure bulbs. But yeah, Furcraea, really interesting crop there. I'm gonna definitely be experimenting with trying to turn some of it into silage. Already I've used some of its stalks. The stalks, honestly, those guys are fucking monsters. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, the stalks of Furcraea, they are like an equivalent of an agave americana stalk. Like, they're giants. They're really, really thick, and that's why they make great steaks. But that also means they have a lot of biomass in them that can be converted, right? And you can even check the bricks on the stalks, and they read different type of bricks, right? So they have a lot of sugar in them as well as fiber. So there's companies that are obviously turning this fibers into surfboards from the agave, but Furcraea stalks could probably be used in a similar fashion to make different manufactured products like that. And it might even be stronger, to be honest, than a lot of the other agaves, because looking at some of the agave stalks that I have, I got them in a huge pile, and then Cholo! Right next to my agave stalks is the Furcraea stalks, and the Furcraea stalks, it almost makes the agaves look small, you know, except if it's like an agave Americana stalk. So it definitely has a lot of use, you know, that you can potentially make out of it. As I've mentioned, you can make different drinks out of the stalks, right? So you could press them into making like kind of like a fresh sugarcane stalk juice if you roast them and squeeze them. You can, you know, like I mentioned, make the wine or make potentially a spirit if you want with the stalks. The leaves, I've mentioned, they're really good for the animals and stuff. Trying to think of any tips that might help you with the Furcraea. Definitely don't overwater them. While they look like a crop that would love water, they don't. They can rot easily, and they're susceptible to plagues. So I've seen an incredible amount of them plagued in gardens, and I try not to harvest them if they're too plagued and stuff, right? Or if they're plagued, usually I bring them to the desert. The desert gets rid of most plagues through the heat or the cold, right? But yeah, they have a high susceptibility, I'd say, more so than a lot of different plants to plagues. And if you're going to be growing them, make sure to not make a favorable plague environment. It's going to be high humidity and high irrigation. You want to make sure to either dry farm them, like especially if you're like in Santa Barbara. With the fucking rain you guys get, that's it, man. Don't, you know, plant them in the fall, establish them, and leave them. Because if you overwater them, even if you're up in Sonoma or Napa or Lake, if you overwater them, you guys are getting 20, 30 inches of rain, yeah, that's just gonna fucking rot, man. So, dry farm it, you know? You're in a region where you could dry farm shit. Stop watering, overwatering stuff, you know? Yeah, if you stop overwatering, you'll get rid of like 90% of your fungi and pests and shit. I mean, honestly, it's like pests, man, fungi, they don't want to go for a healthy crop. Too much work. They go for shitty crops. So it's like, you have to make sure your stuff is healthy, right? So don't give it an environment where it's just sitting in this stuff where all this other bad stuff can propagate itself out, right? Be smart about it. Got to be smart about it. As I mentioned, the stalk is very large. I mean, I've seen some even get up to 20 feet tall. So just put that into perspective, how much it can produce in bulbs and seed and, you know, biomass. So, yeah, I hope you learned something today about Furcraea. I wanted this to be like 10 to 15 minutes, but every time I'm always thinking about different shit. So, Furcraea, it's a crop that I think it's going to be heard about more in California and the U.S. You know, as I mentioned, the California agave, people who have been passing this legislation indirectly started a lot of different industries, because, you know, that's where sometimes they say, you know, like, don't hate your enemies and shit, because it's like, while I hate what they're doing with agave, they inspired me and several other people to start exploring Furcraea, Asparagaceae, Eucalyptus, Acilarion, Manfreda, Mangaves, and now we're seeing that this whole family is very valuable, not just agave, right? And obviously asparagus is a multi-billion-dollar world, right? So there's already other crops in agave family, the Asparagaceae, that are fucking killing it. So, you know, agave is one that's already proliferating. I think these other ones is even better of an option if you are exploring agave to get into, because there's not so many people in it, right? Farming, it really is, you know, the riches are in the niches, and you know, if everybody in California is growing agave tequiliana and agave espadín angustifolia subspecies, then you need to stay the fuck away from that unless you're going to be at this giant scale, you know? It's like, you know, if everybody is growing agave tequiliana and the price is low like in Mexico, none of us are going to be profitable, you know? But if everybody's growing Tequiliana and I have 40, 50 different other species, and then I can sell those species at different times and different prices, and I get to call my own prices, and I'm not saying don't grow agave Tequiliana. I'll tell you what, if I was growing agave Tequiliana, I'd have to be so good of quality, right? Because you're going to have to stand out from those giant corporations that are growing agave Tequiliana and making spirits, right? So if you do want to grow Tequiliana, you're going to have to make one of the best spirits in the world to even compete. Whereas these big guys are going to compete with you with making straight trash. So everybody chooses their battles. I've always been a person, like, I got into agave in the first place because nobody was in it. Now that people are in it, I'm exploring a bunch of different options in agave and other, agave family crops. So, you got to always be innovating, right? To give an example, it's like a lot of agave Tequiliana right now is extremely cheap when it was 1-2 years ago very expensive in the nursery trade, right? And people are coming to me for all types of other agaves, and I'm selling them at great prices, right? And there are agaves that I have broken the price. I give examples like, different agaves like agave Valeriana. When the price is, $30 a 5-gal, and I grow 100,000 of them, and then drop the price, down to 10, then the price now is 10, So my goal with a lot of this always has been to outproduce, to mass produce stuff that we don't have. So Tequiliana, I really don't want to focus on it, or Espadín, because people are just mass producing it and making straight trash with it. So I focus on other shit, And that's how you got to be, man. You got to be moving to all these different angles and stuff, right? So that's a little tougher with a crop like agave. But as I always mention, you got to have a polyculture and be diverse. So grow all these other different crops, man. Don't limit yourself, and definitely don't listen to some shitty regulators that want to regulate your crop. If you really want to farm agave and you don't want to do this shit in California under regulation, reach out to me. I've got a lot of other farmers that have already moved out of state, and they're just, this was just one thing that inspired them to make that move quicker. Because I get an example. One of these farmers that I was working with to farm agave in Ventura, she moved, no, not the girl that moved to Arizona. She moved to Nevada. And Nevada has, like, very low fucking taxes. So not only did she escape potential regulation that's coming to agave with the Agave Commission, but she's also now with her farm paying far fewer taxes. So, it's not the worst thing in the world to make more money by moving to another state, I'll tell you what. So, don't be afraid to innovate, and just don't give a fuck about, those bad players. That's what my advice would be. But yeah, there's a lot of crops to focus on, not just agave there. But yeah, hope you learned something, and catch you on the next one. I got some podcasts about cactus that I'll be bringing out probably pretty soon. I don't know if I remember to upload them, but have a great rest of the day, everyone, and I'll catch you later. If you need any Furcraea, you already know who to hit up. Peace.